And we are back for prepping for winter with the second Tyrion sample chapter. Tyrion is at the Battle of Fire, rather dreading the coming battle, so much so that he is thinking of past girlfriends and nearly murdered Penny. A messenger arrives reiterating orders for the Second Sons to attack the Ironborn, but the messenger is promptly ignored by the paymaster Inkpots, who claims that Brown Ben needs to return from the girl general first. Tyrion and Jorah try to convince Inkpots that they're on the wrong side, and Inkpots tells Jorah to talk to Brown Ben when he returns. And so let's continue. By the time Plum and his companions came galloping back from the camp of the girl general, the white dragon had flown back to its lair above Marine. The green still prowled, soaring in wide circles above the city and the bay on great green wings. Brown Ben Plum wore plate and mail over boiled leather. The silk cloak flowing from his shoulders was his only concession to vanity. It rippled when he moved, the color changing from pale violet to deep purple. He swung down from his horse and gave her over to a groom, then told Snatch to summon his captains. "Tell them to make haste," added Casporio the Cunning. So next we hear about the return of Brown Ben Plum and his companions. Interestingly enough, Brown Ben, wherever he went, supposedly to the girl general, brought with him Casporio the Cunning, his second in command. Now again, we should note how deceptive Brown Ben has been. He receives an order from Pudding Face to attack the Ironborn, then goes to see the girl general, who's not his commander, for new orders, likely because he didn't like Pudding Faces, and he brings with him his second in command, Casporio, leaving the company to the risk-averse paymaster to ensure that Pudding Face's orders can't be carried out. It also seems that a fair bit of time has been wasted. Viserion has returned to his lair at the Pyramid of Uchles, though Rhaegal is still circling about. Flying in circles, by the way, is something that birds do to gain altitude on rising hot air, and the altitude is useful for seeking out prey. It is interesting that Rhaegal is not content with dead bodies for food, while Viserion was. Rhaegal may be holding out for something else, perhaps catching wind of Victarion's pork. Now, a bit of time is spent describing Brown Ben's attire. I will say that Brown Ben is armored rather heavily, which signals again that he had no intention of implementing Pudding Face's order. Dealing with Ironborn coming ashore would likely require mobility, quick strikes and retreats. This is a job for Light Horse. Heavy Horse is usually used for charges against infantry. Brown Ben, it seems, heard Pudding Face's order and got dressed in armor designed for a different type of attack. And of course, he then went off to see the girl general. We are also told that Brown Ben allows himself one piece of vanity, and that is his purple silk cloak. Silk cloaks are ceremonial in nature, so yes, this is a bit of vanity for Brown Ben. Of course, purple is the color of Brown Ben's house, House Plum, but we can't help but think of Targaryen eyes when various shades of purple are talked about. In fact, in the very first Daenerys chapter back in A Game of Thrones, Illyrio dresses Dany in plum to bring out the color of her eyes. Here Brown Ben's cloak shifts from a light violet to a deep purple, perhaps signifying his change of heart regarding the Dany cause. Now, I will say there is some question to when exactly Brown Ben decided to defect back to Dany. The symbolism of the cloak and the haste to which he calls the sergeants together points to it being rather early. Then again, we also know that Inkpots told Jorah to talk to Brown Ben, which must happen shortly after this scene, and Jorah is integrated into Brown Ben's plans. Whatever the case, it's fairly certain, as we'll go into, that Brown Ben had decided to defect prior to the sergeants' meeting taking place. Jorah may have gone to talk to Brown Ben, who had already chosen to defect, or perhaps Jorah was the one who did the convincing. Tyrion was not even a sergeant, but their Cyvasse games had made him a familiar sight in Brown Ben's tent, and no one tried to stop him when he entered with the rest. Besides Casporio and Inkpots, Uchlan and Bakoko were amongst those summoned. The dwarf was surprised to see Sir Jorah Mormont there as well. So here we have a gathering of the Second Son's leadership. Casporio, Brown Ben's second, is there, as well as the paymaster Inkpots and the sergeant Uchlan. This is Uchlan's first mention other than the A Dance with Dragons appendix. I imagine Snatch is there too, as he's a sergeant and he was the one doing the summoning. Now, Tyrion is surprised to see Jorah there, but he should also be surprised to see Bakoko. Bakoko is not a sergeant. He's an axeman of formidable repute. He has no business discussing company strategy, and neither does Jorah, a new recruit with considerable bias. And with Jorah's presence, it becomes abundantly clear that he did in fact talk to Brown Ben beforehand and has been invited into the tent for some reason. Now, Jorah entering the tent may be a callback to A Game of Thrones when Mirri Maz Duur specifically told him not to enter the tent while she was doing her magics. Jorah defies the order and enters anyway, perhaps changing everything for Daenerys. She miscarries, perhaps because of Jorah's interference, though it's all left very ambiguous. Him entering the tent may have changed nothing. And now here again, Jorah has entered the tent, perhaps changing everything, but again, his role in Brown Ben's decision process is not entirely clear, so perhaps he changes nothing. Now later on, violence does occur in the tent involving Jorah, in all likelihood a planned event, so it seems Jorah and Bakoko are both here in the tent to provide extra muscle for the Second Son's sergeants.
"We are commanded to defend Wicked Sister,"
Brown Ben informed them. The other men exchanged uneasy glances. No one seemed to want to speak until Sir Jorah asked, "On whose authority?"
"The girl's. Sir Grandfather is making for the Harridan, but she's afraid he'll turn towards Wicked Sister next. The ghost is already down. Marcellin's freedmen broke the long lances like a rotten stick and dragged it over with chains. The girl figures Selmy means to bring down all the trebuchets."
"It's what I'd do in his place," Sir Jorah said. "Only I would have done it sooner." So here Brown Ben tells the group that they are commanded to defend Wicked Sister, the nearby trebuchet. Interestingly, it's Jorah, who again is nobody and shouldn't even be there, who speaks, asking of the command's authority, which Brown Ben reveals to be the Girl General. Of course, again, the Girl General isn't in charge. Pudding Face is. Her command should be meaningless, but Brown Ben for some reason sought out a command from the Girl General, defying Pudding Face, and has presented this command to his sergeants. Now, it should be noted that commands are not usually debated by subordinates, but instead implemented. Yet here we are with the Second Sons discussing their orders by committee. It appears that Brown Ben did not like his first order, went to get a second order, and now doesn't like that second order either, which is why there seems to be a calling together of the sergeants. Brown Ben is probably trying to get his sergeants on board with defecting to Daenerys' cause. Now, we also get a bit of description of what's going on the battlefield, though we're not sure how much of it is true. If Brown Ben has decided to defect to Daenerys' cause, then it's in his best interest to claim that things are not going well for the Yunkish, but instead going well for the Daenerys cause on the battlefield. Anyway, first Brown Ben says that Barristan is heading towards the Trebuchet Harridan, which was in fact Barristan's announced plan in his first sample chapter. Of course, in Barristan's second sample chapter, we find out that he cancels his assault on Harridan and attacks other forces instead. We aren't sure if Barristan turned back towards Harridan, or if this is incorrect information. In fact, later on in this chapter, we find out that the Unsullied are heading towards Harpy's daughter, most likely with Barristan. So unless they very quickly took down Harridan, Brown Ben's information is off or old. Whatever the case, it doesn't seem that Barristan is actually heading south towards Wicked Sister at all. We also hear about Marcellin's freedmen and their battle with the Long Lances. Marcellin is an ex-Unsullied who formed the Mother's Men, who according to Barristan is exiting the southern gate. And according to Brown Ben, they have now defeated the sellswords, the Long Lances, at the Trebuchet Ghost of Astapor, and have dragged it over. Now, the Long Lances are 800 horse, but we have no idea how large the Mother's Men are, so we also have no idea if this is a realistic event or not. Marcellin, in his brief appearances, comes off as competent, so perhaps, but the extremely odd thing about the news is that a trebuchet was taken down when just 2 pages earlier in this chapter all 6 were functioning. Perhaps the event just happened, but Brown Ben frames it as something that happened when he was still at the Girl General, that she heard the news and devised her orders based on that. The timing of everything is just off here, and I can't really explain it. Marcellin exits his gate and heads to the Ghost of Astapor at the same time that Barristan exits his gate to head to Harridan. Yet Marcellin has already won and dragged over his trebuchet, while Barristan is still heading towards his trebuchet. It's a bit odd. Again, we shouldn't necessarily trust anything that Brown Ben is saying, but perhaps all of this weirdness can be chalked up to the fog of war and variance in when news is received. Regardless, it's important to note the picture that Brown Ben is painting, whether accurate or not. Barristan is to the north of the Second Sons, and the Mother's Men are to the east, with the idea that they're going after all of the trebuchets, with Wicked Sister being next. If this information were true, the Second Sons would be sandwiched between Barristan and the Mother's Men, and ordered to defend Wicked Sister. Brown Ben has gone out of his way to paint a rather grim situation on the battlefield for the Second Sons. Jorah then closes the passage with a statement that he too would be trying to take down the trebuchets, only sooner. Now, this is a peculiar statement, as the trebuchets are not, as of yet, really a very big threat. They are, after all, only throwing dead bodies. Yes, Barristan's plan is in fact to take down Harridan, but his plan after that is actually to target Yunkish noblemen and fall back to the safety of the wall. He mentions nothing of trying to take down Wicked Sister and the other trebuchets, and sellswords are definitely not the focus. Slave masters are. What Jorah chiming in does do is reinforce the belief that Wicked Sister is the next target. That is, that the Second Sons are in a grim situation, about to be sandwiched between enemy forces. His message is a support of Brown Ben's claims, which points to the idea that the two did in fact talk before the meeting in the tent. Why is the girl still giving orders? Inkpot sounded baffled. Dawn has come and gone. Can she not see the sun? She is behaving as if she were still the Supreme Commander. If you were her and knew that Pudding Face were about to assume command, you might keep giving orders too, said Mormont. One is no better than the other, Casporio insisted. True, said Tyrion, but Malaza has the nicer teats. So next Inkpots wonders aloud why the girl general is still giving orders, noting that she is not the Supreme Commander. Of course, this exposes how ridiculous this whole situation is. Absolutely the girl general is not the Supreme Commander. No one should be talking about her or any of her commands right now. Pudding Face is the Supreme Commander. And that should be the end of the story, but here the characters are sitting around talking about the girl general. This statement by Inkpots does imply that he wasn't clued in about the possible defection to Dany, as he highlights that the girl general doesn't have any authority. Anyway, Jorah then says that the girl general is still giving orders because Pudding Face is about to take command, implying Pudding Face is incompetent. Jorah is, by the way, twisting events here. Pudding Face isn't about to take command, he has already taken command, and has already given orders. They're true orders. And of course, we only have orders from the girl general because Brown Ben improperly went to her seeking them. I will say it does appear that Jorah is playing damage control, as Inkpots' comment does lead back to Pudding Face. Jorah delegitimizes Pudding Face to bring things back to the girl general. Casporio then chimes in, claiming that both commanders, Pudding Face and the girl general, are both incompetent, also playing damage control it seems. However, this comment once again displays the baseless stereotyping that various characters do towards the Yunkish. As I've mentioned before, characters in our story have been acting like the Giscari are all the same, when in fact they are a pretty diverse bunch. There may be some comeuppance in our story for this type of thinking. Funny enough, Tyrion chimes in with a joke that is completely irrelevant to the entire conversation. Tyrion, who thinks himself the intelligent manipulator, is now playing second fiddle to Jorah, who is taking control of the situation. He seems to have won over Brown Ben, has been scheming with him, and is integral to the conversation with the Second Sons. The tables have turned. Crossbows is how you hold Wicked Sister, Inkpot said. Scorpions, mangonels, that's what's needed. You do not use mounted men to defend a fixed position. Does the girl mean for us to dismount? If so, why not use her spears or slingers? And so here we find that Inkpots is beside himself with how bad the orders are from the girl general. Now I will say it's difficult to discern whether or not these are genuine orders from Malaza. As the presence of Jorah and the extra muscle shows, Brown Ben has already decided to defect to Dany at this point. So it may be that these orders from the girl general are a mere creation of Brown Ben, something to make the sergeants feel better about defection. On the other hand, if these orders are from the girl general, it's a mystery what she's thinking. Is she really that bad at strategy, or do the Yunkish lords have some other secret strategy in mind? Something that involves sacrificing the Second Sons like pieces on a Cyvast board. After all, Tywin at the Green Fork did purposely try to sacrifice forces, hoping that they would create an overcommitment by the opposition. That said, the fact that Pudding Face and later on the Drunken Conqueror have different plans for the Second Sons is evidence against this idea. Kem stuck his pale blonde head inside the tent. Sorry to disturb, my lords, but another rider's come. Says he has new orders from the Supreme Commander. Brown Ben glanced at Tyrion, then shrugged. Send him in. In here? Kem asked, confused. Here is where I seem to be, Plum said with a trace of irritation. If he goes somewhere else, he will not find me. And so here Kem announces the arrival of a Yunkish rider, and in case one was still doubting whether or not Brown Ben had already decided to defect to Dany beforehand, this is some final confirmation that a plan was in fact in place. Brown Ben requests that the rider come into the tent, which baffles Kem. This action is clearly against protocol, and it's rather apparent that Plum wants to murder the rider with a bit of secrecy. He has the extra muscle of Jorah and Bakoko already in the tent, and now he wants to lure his victim inside. Brown Ben even glances at Tyrion as if he knows what will happen next. After all, Tyrion is an easy-to-identify escaped slave that has met all of the Yunkish leadership when he worked for Yezin. They spent hours watching him play Syvass. A conflict is clearly coming, and Brown Ben simply shrugs to it. Out went Kem. When he returned, he held the tent flap open for a Yunkish nobleman in a cloak of yellow silk and matching pantaloons. The man's oily black hair had been tortured, twisted, and lacquered to make it seem as if 100 tiny roses were sprouting from his head. On his breastplate was a scene of such delightful depravity that Tyrion sensed a kindred spirit. And so Kem leaves and returns with a new messenger, who is not just any messenger, but a Yunkish nobleman. Now, we have actually met this Yunkish nobleman before. In Barristan's Discarded Knight chapter, Barristan and Hisdar are greeted with 3 emissary wise masters. They are the Rabbit, a man in a maroon tokar who may or may not be the Drunken Conqueror since he was supreme commander that day, and finally this man, a Yunkish nobleman with a breastplate displaying a sex scene. Now it's difficult to say who this is, but due to the fact that he has hair made into roses and wears an armored breastplate at all times, I'm guessing he's the perfumed hero. Yezin, the Pigeon, and Pudding Face are dead. We know the Drunken Conqueror, the Rabbit, the Girl General, and the Clanker Lords are elsewhere, and he doesn't fit the description of Lord Wobblecheeks. And so assuming he's a Yunkish lord from the appendix, that leaves either the Charioteer, the Beastmaster, or the Perfumed Hero, the latter which fits best. And this is a good place to stop. We'll finish up with Tyrion and the Battle of Fire next time in Tyrion 7. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.